All right, another item that I find actually a little bit comical is the tactical pen. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that if I was to use that in a self-defense situation, that would have been taken by the police, the arresting officers. They would take a photo of it, it would go to you, you would take one look at that and say, that's not a pen, that's actually a weapon, and then you would just destroy the whole use of it.
Well, that's a very interesting point, Jeff, and it raises two different issues. The first is puncturing type weapons are referred to as prohibited weapons under the schedule of the Prohibited Weapons Act. But even if it's found not to be a prohibited weapon, under the Summary Offences Act, there's another section for offensive implements. And what an offensive implement means is anything made or adapted for use for causing injury to a person, or anything intended by the person having custody of the thing to be used to injure or menace a person or damage property. So clearly, if you were detected with one of these tactical pens or one of these key rings which they use as weapons, and if the prosecuting authorities were aware of that, they would, at the bare minimum, consider that to be an offensive implement. And offensive implements can include things like carrying sticks and just general weapons like baseball bats, cricket bats, golf clubs. If you intend to use them as a weapon, it's open to the court to find that they're in fact offensive implements.
So another example would be people often say that they carry a baseball bat in their car. That's okay because they have a baseball in there as well as a mitt.
Yeah. That's an old chestnut, and I mean, people I suppose have been saying that for years. A couple of different issues about weapons, Jeff, that we haven't touched on is that once you pull a baseball bat out of your car, you are escalating the violence significantly. So it's very easy for you to be seen as the aggressor, as a person overreacting, as a person who's not acting proportionate in the circumstances. And as we've seen in the other videos, it's very open for the court to find that you just weren't acting reasonably. The baseball bat itself can be deemed in those circumstances to be an offensive implement. You may have an argument that you had it in your car to play baseball with your kids or to go out on weekends with your mates, but why were you pulling it out of your car to confront other motorists?
And one other one is that that someone sent in was, what happens if I'm, say, for example, in a room like this and I'm cornered by three people?
Yeah.
Perhaps there's a brick on the ground near me or something like that that I can pick up and use.
Yeah.
Where does that come in? Where does that fit in the scheme of things?
The brick, again, can be used to defend yourself, but it still gets back to the issue of what's proportionate and what's reasonable. Now, for example, if you knew for a reason that these people were going to do grievous bodily harm to you, serious injury, or they were going to kill you, then of course you'd be justified in using the brick to try and defend yourself.
So if they jumped in and they were saying, you know, they had a knife and they were saying they're going to cut your eye out or something like that, then that would make it a little bit more reasonable?
It certainly would, and also if you had known about the conduct of these people in the past, you'd known that they'd cut other people up, that they'd been convicted of offences, that they were dangerous, that they'd threatened you in the past, that they'd taken various action against other people. All these things would be weighed up by the court to see on the subjective and objective test, you personally and also a reasonable person in your position, whether that would be reasonable. So of course, it's not black and white, it's a grey area, but you would certainly have an argument if those factors were in place.
Okay, so my understanding is that what could happen one day may be argued in your favour. If with a different jury, with a different prosecutor, it may not go your way. So it's like a game as such that you have the prosecutor trying to influence the jury that this happened, and then you've got the defendant on the other side arguing against it. So it's more or less a competition between those two to make a better argument for the jury to rule in your favour. So that way it's very unpredictable. You could have a different jury on one day that might be all for you, and then on the other day someone who thinks what you did is totally wrong.
That's exactly right, Jeff. We work under a system called the common law system, which is an English system, and our system is what they call adversarial. So adversarial means there's two sides. It's similar to combat, it's similar to a sport. So just like in fighting, one boxer might win one day and they might have a rematch and the other boxer might beat them. It's the same in court, and as you've hinted at, every person that you argue these things in front of is going to be different. Every jury panel is going to be different. Every judge is going to be different. Every prosecutor is going to be different. Every police officer is going to be different, and they're going to bring their own personal biases, their own personal experiences, and their own subjective views to determine whether they are of the view that you acted reasonably in these circumstances. And hence, that's why it's so hard for us to give black and white answers to what is, in effect, going to be self-defence or not, because it comes down to the two tests. The subjective test, did you believe what you were doing was reasonable in the circumstances, and the objective test, did a reasonable person in your position feel that they would be reasonable acting the same way? And of course, your legal representation will have a big bearing on that in trying to explain to the court, trying to explain to the jury why that was reasonable and necessary, and of course will depend on the prosecutor if they can prove beyond reasonable doubt that your actions weren't reasonable in the circumstances.
So essentially, you know, if you have any problems with self-defence, it'd be wise to speak to someone like you because you have that background. So you would argue well for it and well against it because of that.
Yeah.
So, and in layman's terms, I guess it'd be like a boxing match. You'll often see two judges scoring a boxing match differently.
Yeah.
So it all comes down to that, basically.
Yeah. You hear some people refer to court as a game. I certainly don't call it a game, but it is a competition, and you really have to put your best foot forward. And of course, just like when you're going to get a car fixed, you take it to a mechanic. If you're going to build a house, you call a builder. If you need to go to court for a criminal matter, you call a criminal lawyer.